Hello and welcome to this workshop on the impact of change. It's fair to say that we live in an ever-changing world. Of course, change is nothing new. It has been around for hundreds, thousands of years, but the pace of change is accelerating, and so is our understanding of the impact that it has on people. A large amount of research has been carried out, especially over recent years, and a lot of people are getting very rich by writing books on the subject of change, how to cope with change, a number of training courses and software packages that you can buy around organisational change. But most focus on processes and systems and how businesses should adapt to prosper in a competitive, changing world. Now, while this is very important, organisational change can only take place if the individuals involved change their behaviours. So as it says on the slide, change doesn't happen because a chief executive or a management team says that it should. It will only happen if the people involved change their behaviour. So this workshop is going to focus on the impact of change on us as individuals. Understanding the impact that change has on us and our own reactions to change, it empowers us as individuals. The learning objectives for this session are to firstly understand how change affects us as individuals, to understand the change process, so the stages that we all go through following a change, and then finally to learn ways to help ourselves and others to progress through the change process in an accelerated way. The agenda for this session is firstly an introduction to the subject of change, and then going on to understand some of the feelings associated with change. We'll look at the change curve, which shows how people change, and then finally we'll look at how we can help ourselves and others through the change process. We'll summarise briefly at the end. So as an introduction to change, it's important to remind ourselves that firstly, change is almost constant. Large and small changes are happening to us all the time. What's important to note here is that some changes that we experience will be big, major, life-changing experiences, and others will be smaller, more manageable changes. It's important to recognise that we are all different and we will all react differently. So what may seem like a small change for one person may be a much bigger deal for somebody else. The key, though, is that the effect that change has on us as individuals should never be underestimated or disregarded. It's important to remember as well that changes occur both in your work life and in your private life, and both can affect each other if not managed. When you come to work in the morning, you don't leave part of yourself at home, so changes in your personal life, however hard we try, can impact on your working day and how you react to further changes at work. And the opposite is true, and we all know how difficult it can be sometimes. If we've had a bad day at work, it can be really hard to leave that behind when we get home in the evening. So managing a change can become an issue if we don't recognise that we are going through a change in the first place. It's really important to understand your role in supporting each other, your colleagues, your family and your friends through change and the huge impact that you can have. However, it is also very important not to forget the effect that the change has on yourself as an individual and how you can help yourself through change. Now, at this moment, I'd just like you to pause and think about a change that you've been through fairly recently, and this could be something that's happened at work or something in your personal life. But what's important here is I want you to think about your reactions. So when that change happened, when you experienced it or when it was announced to you, what emotions did you immediately feel? And perhaps what different emotions did you feel over time? What hidden opportunities or possibilities did you find in the change over time? So just spend a few minutes now thinking about that. Jot some things down if it helps. looking now at the feelings associated with change. So change occurs when something ends and something new or different starts. And the period between these 2 points is known as a transition. This is where people have learnt to let go of the old and embrace the new. So usually this involves moving from the familiar to the unknown. Perhaps one of the most common mistakes in managing change is underestimating the effect that this change and transition has on ourselves and on other people. It's vital to remember that we all need time to adjust to change. One of the strongest responses to change can be a feeling of loss. During a change, it is normal that we feel a loss associated with that change. For example, when a major change occurs within an organisation, employees normally experience several types of loss. For example, security. Employees no longer know what their future holds or where they stand in the organisation, so they feel a loss of that security that they had before. They may feel a loss of competence, so people sometimes feel very embarrassed when they are faced with new tasks and they don't know how to do them. Maybe they're using a new piece of software that they haven't used before, or a new telephone system. It can be very hard to admit that you don't know how to do something. So then you may feel this loss of competence. Now you may feel a loss of relationships. This can occur with territory changes within roles. So for example, familiar people, customers, colleagues that you worked with before can suddenly disappear. People can feel that they lose their sense of belonging to a team, a group, or even the organisation. People may feel a loss of a sense of direction. Following an organisation change, employees can lose an understanding of where they're going and why they're going there. They can feel a little bit lost if their plans suddenly take a different direction or don't materialise. And finally, a common feeling is a feeling of loss associated with territory. So this may simply involve your workspace. Maybe you're sitting at a different desk and you miss where you were sat before. Or it could be around the boundaries of the job itself. It could be a different sales territory. It can lead to feelings of uncertainty about the area that you used to belong to. A very important point to note here also is that even with positive changes, so things that we have wanted to happen, we can still feel a loss. So for example, you might apply for a promotion or a new job, a change that you've instigated yourself, yet it's still normal to feel a loss associated with that change. And it's important to recognise and accept this loss before you can move forward in the new direction. And this can be a hard one to understand, and especially with colleagues, with friends. If they've achieved a promotion, you'd expect them to be happy. And if they talk about feeling a loss of what they've left behind, sometimes we can be a little intolerant, or sometimes we don't understand that. But actually these feelings are completely normal, and the more that we realise that this is normal and we can assure other people that it's normal, it will help us to accept the change and move forward. The final point that you see on the slide is also incredibly important, is that it should never be regarded as a weakness to feel a loss associated with a change. In fact, people who do not display any feelings of loss often save it up and become overcome by a seemingly small transition further down the line. So it's far healthier to express and acknowledge loss when it occurs. Some will feel the loss more so than the others, and as we've said, that is completely normal. Every change involves elements of both risk and opportunity. Initially, as a change is announced, it can be regarded as a threat or a risk, and therefore our natural reaction is to fear and resist the change. However, after a while, people may get used to the change and start to see that it may actually lead to new opportunities. Once people accept that a change can provide new opportunities and possibilities, the change is well on the way to a successful implementation. And this can be seen in more detail on the transition curve, or the change curve as it's more commonly known. So introducing you here to the transition curve, or the change curve. This originated back in the 1970s, when it was actually used to explain how individuals react to major losses such as bereavement. But over the years it's been adapted to explain the reaction to any kind of change, including organisational changes. The model is good because it's easy to relate to your own experience. So just to try to bring the transition curve to life, I'm going to ask you now to sit back, to relax, to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself in this situation. So imagine this. It's a freezing cold winter's morning and you're lying in bed. The alarm goes off and you wake up with a start because it's a really important day for you. You've got a really important meeting at work and it's really important that you're on form and you need to impress. So you get up, you get dressed into your most professional work clothes, you have some breakfast and you leave the house, ready for your important day. When you get to the car, it's frozen over, so you spend some time scraping the ice off the windscreen and round the windows of the car. You then get in, put the key in the ignition, go to start the car, but nothing happens. It seems the engine is dead. The first thing you do is turn the key again and again and again, because you're in denial. This can't be happening. But then you start to feel a little guilty. Oh, I should have put the car in the garage last night. I should have got it serviced. The reminder came through last month. I should have cleaned the car at the weekend. That might have helped. I should have covered the windscreen. And you start to feel a bit guilty, but not for long, because then you start to get really angry. And you thump the steering wheel with your hand and you stamp your feet and you probably say a few words and get very angry. This car's so rubbish, why do you never work for me? You might start to blame someone else. Who was the last person to drive the car? They must have left the lights on. It's all their fault. Life's so unfair. And you start to get really angry. Until you stop. And then you start to bargain. You bargain with anybody. Just please, car, just start this one more time. I'll never ask for anything ever again. I'll get you serviced next week. I'll clean you every week. Just please start for me this one time. You turn the key, but of course nothing happens. The engine is still dead. So then you plunge into chaos. What am I going to do? The car won't start. I need to get to work. I've got this really important meeting. It can be a very uncomfortable position. You feel lost. You're not sure what to do. It's not a good place to be. But soon you start to feel depressed. Typical. Why do these things always happen to me? Now I'm going to be really late for work. That's if I get there at all. I'll probably miss the meeting and I'll probably end up losing my job. Life is so unfair. You start to feel very helpless and undervalued and unloved and quite depressed. And this will continue for a little while until eventually you accept the current situation. Okay, this car's dead, it's not going anywhere, I'm going to have to think about an alternative. And suddenly you start to think about other opportunities. You're open to different ways forward. Actually, I could call a taxi, or I could ring John and see if I could get a lift with him. Or maybe I could call the breakdown services and see if they can get the car started. Suddenly, as soon as you accept the current situation and you're open to new ways forward, the ideas will come to you. You're encouraged and involved in finding a way forward, and very soon, before you know it, you're bound to get yourself to work. Now you can open your eyes and look at the change curve and see if you can relate the story I've talked about to that curve. Now that's a trivial example, one we can probably all relate to in some way, shape or form. What I'd like to do now is draw your eye to the two lines on the change curve. So you have the blue line and the purple line. And the purple line at the top demonstrates what we mean by a well-managed curve, a well-managed change. What it shows is that you're going through the same feelings following the change, but it's much quicker, and the depth of the emotions felt is much lower, so the feelings are not quite so acute. So in the example I've just given, imagine if your neighbour had come out. You've tried to start the car, it won't start, you've felt guilty, you're a little bit angry, but then your neighbour pops out and says, "Oh, are you having some trouble? Why don't you come and sit in the warm? I'll make you a cup of tea and we'll call you a taxi." Or why don't I give you a lift to work? So the actions of another person have enabled you to get through that change curve so much quicker, and you're encouraged and involved, and you found a solution much quicker than if you were left by yourself. Now again, as I said, that's a trivial example. With a much more significant change in your life, you can see how those feelings can be quite significant, and the huge impact that another person can have on your ability to get through that change curve. Another important point to note with the change curve is it's not necessarily a linear process. So you can move through the stages, but you can fall back down again. So it's important to keep supporting yourself and keep supporting other people through change. Now sometimes we can whiz through the change curve so quickly that we barely even notice that we've been through those changes, and you'll probably think back at this point of changes you've been through and think, I can't actually relate to those changes, and that may be because it happened so quickly you barely noticed. But with other changes you may be able to relate to, some of those changes can last for a long time, years even, if we don't manage the change and look after ourselves and help ourselves through change. And that's why it's really important to understand this subject. So at this point, again reflecting on changes that you've been through and perhaps what helped you, I'd like you to imagine that you or a colleague has just experienced a change and you're on the left hand side of that change curve. I'd like you to think for a moment about what could help you to move from the left to the right of the change curve through those different stages. What support would help? And how could you perhaps provide support to other people to help them? If somebody's in denial, one of the key things that we can do is listen. Be there. Support them, not to judge, but demonstrate empathy. So put ourselves in their shoes. How would they be feeling right now? Demonstrate concern. Acknowledge that a loss has occurred, and don't let that person become isolated. Provide the individual with information. Assure them that the change will happen. They may be in denial, they may be thinking it won't. So it's important to be assertive and to say that the change will happen and not to give false hope, but to ensure that, to give that reassurance that you'll be there to support them, to explain what to expect, and suggest some things that they may do to help them to adjust to the change, just some small steps. So it's important to give them time to let things sink in, but not too long to let them become isolated. So schedule in a session to talk things over. Now, if somebody's feeling angry, it's important to give them a chance to vent. Acknowledge their feelings, listen to them, let them explain why they're feeling so angry. So again, we're using our active listening skills here. Try to calm them and allow them to vent in a controlled manner so they're not disrupting the rest of the team. If you're in an open plan environment or there's other colleagues around, it might be a good opportunity to take them for a short walk or to go and get a cup of tea, to get them away from other people, to vent quietly away from others. Now really talk to the individual and try to understand why they're so angry. Sometimes it might be something that's happening outside of work that could lead to the anger that they're feeling. So acknowledge feelings, be empathetic, offer support, and never try to talk people out of the feelings or tell them to pull themselves together or to change. It's important to give them time and listen. Again, if people are at the bargaining stage, it's important to understand and explore the feelings that they have at that time. What are their needs? What are their problems? What do they fear? Listen to them. Listen to their suggestions. But again, if they're not feasible, don't give false hope. Be assertive. Again, offering support and listening. If people are feeling chaos, let them talk. Listen and help to provide clarity. Sometimes they just need a little bit of help to see the wood for the trees. Lists are really useful in the chaos stage. So just sit with somebody and list for them the things they're worried about or the things that they have to do. Maybe they need some additional support during this time with their workload, just to make things seem a little bit more manageable. If somebody's feeling depressed following a change, allow them to talk, allow them to express their feelings and try to find the root of the problem. Again, sometimes it might not be due to the change at work, it might be due to something else that's going on in another part of their life. Don't allow the person to fester and to be on their own for too long. Be patient, listen to them, and gradually start to drip feed positive information about the future. Really important here is to make them aware of the support network. So that might be coming back to speak to you or their manager. It might be signposting them to Human Resources or our Employee Assistance Programme. It might be encouraging them to talk to a friend or a family member, or to seek some professional support from their GP or another support organisation. At the resignation stage, it's important to allow the individual to move forward at their own pace, but also offering encouragement, as there can be impatience from the organisation. When somebody's open following a change, again keep listening, keep supporting, and keep offering encouragement. Explain the desired change required of the individual, and try to involve them in the change, perhaps assign tasks to them, and provide direction and guidelines. And finally, as employees are encouraged and involved in a change, redefine the mission and values for the individual, redefine their role and objectives, provide support and give them focus towards this new change and way of being. So in this session we've talked about how change affects us as individuals. We've talked about the change process that we all go through following a change. We've recognised how that at first changes are often feared and resisted, but over time we can start to see that they deliver opportunities and can be positive. We've looked at the change curve and the various stages that people go through following a change. And finally, we've looked at ways to help ourselves and others to progress through the change process in an accelerated way. And what I think is really important to note here is the significant change that we can all have in helping others through change. You don't have to be their manager or a family member. We can all listen. We can all provide support. We can all be there for each other to help them through change. I hope you've enjoyed this workshop. Thank you for listening.